Welcome, everyone. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know your name, where you're from, company, and your interests here today, because this is also about you and getting to know each other as well. So today we're going to be covering what is the Asian American glass ceiling, why does it exist, and really learning what's crucial about it. And I think and how do we solve this problem if we can't understand it first? And so Joy has amassed a wealth of data. She's an author, famous influencer, speaks on this topic, advises companies on it as well. We're going to be walking through the data-backed solutions, how each of us as individuals can break through that ceiling, but how we can be a more powerful leader for our teams as well. So we want you to stay throughout, but we want your engagement. We're going to be asking for your chat and questions. So it's not about questions at the end. It's going to be questions throughout and comments. And from that, and the third, we'll be discussing the most important part is what can we do? How can we dismantle the glass ceiling? How can we allow Asian Americans and all people to unleash their full potential and contribute fully to their companies and to their lives from that? So Joy and I wanted to be as engaging as possible, enlightening as possible. We also know you have a lot of insight. So it's not only questions, but your comments. What's working for you? What's not? So we're going to hop back and forth between this and the chat function from that standpoint. So we'll be using the chat. But there are over 200 of you here, so we're not going to unmute because it's from that might be a lot of background noise from that. So we'll definitely be using chat. So keep the chat coming, your personal stories, thoughts, ways you can connect from that. I'm going to give you a little bit of kind of an overview about Ascend and what we're doing, and welcome you all here today as well from Ascend Leadership, and especially from the Ascend Executive Network, and give you a quick overview. So if we go to the next slide, Marco. So Ascend is the largest North American Pan-Asian business professional community. And we're about building this holistic Pan-Asian business leaders, professionals, really empowering to drive both workplace and societal impact. And with it, we see that what we are doing is really supporting all our professionals through all stages of a career, from students all the way to executives and board members. And we want to help inform and educate about kind of the larger issues that are happening as Pan-Asians. As Joy was saying, the anti-Asian hate that has happened kind of given coronavirus and several other kind of political situations from that standpoint, what can we do? How can we stand up? What are resources and tools that are data-based, evidence-based from that? And then really then providing those tools for change. So we're excited to have you all here. We'll be sharing kind of links and additional resources as well in the chat. Wonderful to have you all here as well. Marco, the next one. As I was mentioning, we are on multiple campuses, universities throughout the country. From that, mentoring students, all the way to professionals in kind of early career, where they're going and how they're kind of breaking the ceilings, to our executive network, where they've broken those ceilings and they're trying to get to the board level, right? Which is our pinnacle board service. And we're trying to increase that pipeline throughout. Based on Ascend data, we found that in some senses, we're invisible. It's easiest for us to get hired in the door, but hardest for us to get promoted to the next level. So excited to have Joy here and kind of her expertise and where we're going. If you skip to the next one, here are all the things that we're doing. And we would love you to kind of join in with us in our advancement levels and kind of breaking the ceilings to breaking into the boardrooms. Our Ascend 1025 initiatives to get 10% of our corporate boards by 2025 to have representations from Asians, to engagement, a kind of 5-step action plan as we're looking towards really engaging and ascending together. It's kind of our hashtag from that, to changing sentiments, to position papers, to storytelling, our LinkedIn campaign, education, development, our convention coming up in August at Disneyland. We'd love to see you all there as well. but we'll just go into a few of those. Next slide, Marco, for them. Just to tell you from the Ascend Executive Network that as we're sponsored and organizing this, we're really bringing together the senior Pan-Asian executives and trying to increase the number in the C-suite and corporate boards. But we really want to connect, inspire, and prepare leaders and future leaders for kind of executive positions and board positions. So world-class network, development, altruism, opportunities for giving back from this, and really about the visibility and influence and finding our voice from that standpoint. So we go into the next slide. I just wanted to introduce, kind of for our main event and kind of, a friend, as I mentioned, an old friend, Joy Chen. Joy is the CEO of JOYOUS, a human capital consulting firm which uses AI and analytics to help companies operationalize inclusion. She previously was an executive recruiter for the global executive search firm Heidrick Struggles. And before that, she served as the deputy mayor of Los Angeles, covering economic workforce development. She's widely recognized as a global leader in unleashing human potential. She's been profiled by the Wall Street Journal, CNN, CBS, ABC, LA Times, Vogue China, Esquire China, and Caxton, among many others. No one is more qualified to address us on the topic today of how do we dismantle the Asian American ceiling. So I want to welcome Joy to us here today.
Oh, thank you, Faye, for that. It is such a joy to be with all of you, and especially with my dear friend, the remarkable Faye Carnegie-Sahai. Thank you to Faye for your incredible leadership in our community, and especially with Ascend. I am so glad to be a member of the Ascend Executive Network, and I hope that you all will check it out. So in this pandemic, I think we've all taken a hard look at our lives and wondered, am I where I should be? Why are some people able to fast track to the top while others get stuck under a glass ceiling? What role does racism play? And why do some people secure bonuses and promotions worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, while others who are just as smart and hardworking get left behind? Why do some people get calls from executive recruiters offering C-suite positions, while other people get none? So today I'll share the answers to these questions so that you too can break through the glass ceiling and build a life of greater opportunity. And so that as corporate leaders, we all can collaborate together to dismantle the Asian American glass ceiling and glass ceilings that hold back all people. Before we dig in, I want to address one thing which is holding back many of us. Right now, you might believe that you'll get to the top if you get a great education and then work really, really hard. I was raised this way too. I call it the Asian American success doctrine, the belief that success comes from two things beginning with the letters HAR, Harvard and hard work. Maybe you've already tried collecting some fancy credentials or tried working super hard to outperform your colleagues. But what if the Asian American success doctrine were not true at all? What if instead success is based on a totally different set of factors? So today, I want to demystify the corporate game. I'll show you why Asian Americans face unique barriers and what we as individuals and as corporate leaders must do to create the conditions in which we and future generations of Asians can better succeed. That'll save you a lot of time and frustration and let us all start working together to dismantle barriers for our community. So in this first section, I'll show you exactly what is the Asian American glass ceiling and how it limits our careers. This will immediately help you gain clarity on the obstacles we're facing. But first, you might be wondering how I figured it all out and got to where I am. So let me tell you so you can understand where it's all coming from. In fact, I think you could say my whole life and career has been a battle against exclusion and for inclusion for myself and others. It all started when I was a kid growing up in Maryland. That's me in a pink and white sweater, my parents, my brother, and in the middle, my grandmother, our Nai, who lived with us. My parents had saved and sacrificed to buy a house in a good school district, which meant that we were the oddball Chinese in a school that was almost all white. One evening, I was about 13, my dad and I were sitting at home when he said, "Tonight's the night of my department's Christmas party." Surprised, I asked why he didn't go. He said, "Because when I go to those things, I never know what to say to people." It was like a lightning bolt had crashed down on my head. I realized two things. One, my old man and I have the same problem. We didn't know how to talk to white people. Two, I realized that this problem would forever limit his career and his life. It didn't matter that he was born in China, had made it all the way to MIT, where he'd gotten a master's in engineering, and now was the hardest worker in his department. In Dad's entire 30-year career, he managed one person, the blind guy, because we live in an ableist world and no one wanted to manage the blind guy. My mom, Shanghai-born Cornell biochemist, 30-year career, never managed a soul. Me, I didn't just want to go to an Ivy League school and become a worker bee. I wanted to change the world. So that night, I resolved to figure out how mainstream American society actually works so that I could get in there and make a difference somehow. I wasn't sure that I could because at school, I was so awkward. The Americans, we called the white kids Americans as if we weren't Americans too. The white kids seemed so carefree. I always wondered how they could be so carefree. The worst was when they were joking around and I'd stand there stiff as a board, berating myself. Think of a joke. If I ever did think of one, it was always 10 minutes too late or that night in bed. Then I was like, ugh, why didn't I think of that earlier? After college, I wanted to live in a place with more Asians. So I moved to Los Angeles. In the early years, I struggled to stay afloat money-wise. I lived in a string of low-cost apartments with roommates I found on bulletin boards and coffee shops. I kept struggling day in and day out to connect with people, to learn the unwritten rules of mainstream society. I got involved with the LA County Young Democrats and volunteered in every campaign, big or small. And over time, luck entered my life in the form of some important mentors, people I met at work and others I met around town. Suddenly, at age 31, I got a crazy lucky break. I became the ultimate insider. I was appointed a deputy mayor of Los Angeles, covering economic and workforce development. It was my first major opportunity to create inclusion for others. I spearheaded a coalition of business, labor, education, and media leaders to create educational workforce programs, which by now have expanded access to new skills and jobs for millions. From there, I was recruited to become an ultimate insider in corporate America as a principal at the global executive search and leadership consulting firm, Heidrick Struggles. I led engagements for Fortune 500 companies across North America, Asia, and Europe. And I started a blog in Chinese and English on the unwritten rules of the corporate game. That blog went viral, prompting a publisher in China to invite me to write a book for women there. The success of that book, Do Not Marry Before Age 30, 30岁前别结婚, and my second book, How to Get Lucky in Your Career, 30岁趁势而为, launched me as China's guru on global careers. I established a Beijing studio where we created online courses and social media, which garnered millions of followers among China's white-collar workforce. Our brand partners included Olay, SK2, and Mercedes. The pandemic era racial reckoning was a wake-up call for me, as I know it was for many of us. I returned to the States, returned to grad school to study organizational psychology at Cornell, and earned a diversity inclusion certification, and then established JOYOUS, which is a consulting firm which sits at the intersection of HR and technology. We use AI and analytics to help companies measure, map, and operationalize inclusion. By now, I've worked at the top of 3 different careers on 3 different continents. I never applied for any of those jobs. Each time, I was invited in and to the very top. Why do I get all the luck while millions of other smart and hardworking people out there don't? Looking back, I see that for decades, I've been generating pulling in fresh new ideas, people, and opportunities. At this point in my career, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds it. So if you're ready to break through in your career, you'll love what's coming up because this story does not stop with me. Not only will I show you how to get a bigger salary and better titles, but I'll show you how to become a magnet for new opportunities, whether you want to move up in a big company or start your own. This way, even as the world changes crazily from year to year, you'll be able to keep reinventing yourself, just as I and many of the world's most successful people continuously do. Most excitingly, I'll show you how we as company leaders can dismantle the Asian American glass ceiling, because there's no need for insiders or outsiders. It's time to unleash the potential of everyone in our organizations. So let's get to it. What exactly is the Asian American glass ceiling? This is a really important question because thanks to the model minority myth, most Americans assume that Asian Americans are super successful. Many companies don't even include us in DEI programming. I found success describing this as an age 30 problem. Yes, starting out in life, Asian Americans are in general super successful. We get the best grades, get at the best schools, the best companies. But then around age 30, just when we should start to take advantage of all that education and hard work to take flight, we plummet from being America's highest potential group to its lowest. Companies love to hire us. They just rarely get around to promoting us. So the Asian American glass ceiling doesn't look like a slab of glass. It's more like a haze of air pollution. At first, it's hard to see, but over time, it stifles the career of nearly every Asian American. We're 6 to 7% of the population, 12% of the workforce, and 1.5% of Fortune 500 corporate officers. Our rate of promotion into management is less than that of whites, African Americans, or Latinos, or corporate America's best educated, hardest working worker bees. What this means for you is that your company may consider you valuable but not promotable. If you leave, they'll just find someone else. You can find yourself with few opportunities to move up or even to move out. You'd be stuck. The implications are huge. In your early 30s, you could be losing out on tens of thousands of dollars a year. Going into your late 30s, 40s, and 50s, that could rise to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Over your career, this translates into millions. And since in the US, wealth is built generationally, the lost earnings and opportunities are massive for you as well as your family. More broadly, the exclusion of Asian Americans from leadership across American business, government, media, and society means that our world has been denied the unique contributions that could have been made by entire generations of Asian Americans. So, why does the Asian American glass ceiling exist? To start breaking that down, let's do a quick survey. Everyone, please go to the chat, click on the Mentimeter link, and then answer the question, what stereotypes does American society hold of Asian Americans? You'll get to input up to 5 different traits. This poll is anonymous, and we'll be building a word cloud together in real time. Just put in the things that come to your mind. I'll wait a few seconds, and then we'll stop the poll. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds. Okay, everyone, no matter how many you have, just hit enter. Marco, let's pull up that word cloud. All right, looks like the top responses were smart, hardworking, let's see, quiet, I see. Looks like those are the top 3. Introvert, good at math. Now, you might look at these and think, these stereotypes don't look too bad. In fact, all stereotypes are harmful because they prevent us from seeing people as individuals. And so they pave the way for exclusion and inequities. To understand how that works, it helps to understand how human beings tick. In fact, Psychologists have found that over 90% of the variance in our positive or negative impressions of other people are driven by just two factors, warmth and competence. Here, it's important to know that warmth doesn't just mean nice, it means how helpful someone thinks you'll be to them. Why are these two traits so important? Scientists think it goes back to evolution. Anytime you meet someone, you want to know, does this person want to help me or hurt me? And is this person capable of doing that? This is a really important insight. Most of us strive to show our competence, but the research shows that, in fact, warmth is much more important in how others evaluate us. You meet someone, you first want to know, friend or foe. That's much more primal and immediate than, where did this person go to school? By the same token, a large body of research shows that all of our biases of other people also fall along these two same dimensions. For decades, one of the world's top social psychologists, Princeton's Susan Fiske, and her teams have been plotting the biases that Americans hold of other groups on this 2x2 chart, with warmth on the y-axis and competence on the x-axis. And this is fascinating. They found that where a stereotype falls in this model reliably predicts people's emotional reactions and behaviors toward members of that group. So, for example, homeless people are stereotyped as cold and incompetent in the lower left corner. They are the despised outgroup. In the warm and competent box are stereotypes of housewives and elderly and disabled people. They are the pitied outgroup. People respond to them by protecting and patronizing them. Of course, warm competents are the admired in-group, consisting of white people, Christians, and men. People respond by following them and promoting them. And every major research study of Asian American stereotypes has come up with findings similar to ours today. Americans stereotype Asian Americans as cold competent. In Dr. Fiske's words, Americans consistently perceive Asian Americans as excessively, perhaps threateningly competent and hyper-competitive. Stereotypes have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies in people's minds. If you're quiet, they might think, see, thinks he's better than us. If you speak up, they might say to themselves, thinks he's smarter than us. Each time, their brains will latch onto that confirming evidence and get a dopamine hit, thinking, yep, just like all those other Asians. In fact, this excessively competent, extremely cold stereotype explains the current surge of anti-Asian hate and every surge of anti-Asian hate and exclusion throughout American society. Because as sociologists explain, when a society is enduring difficult conditions, majority group members who already are biased become especially likely to scapegoat and harm people perceived as cold competent. This stereotype also goes a long way to explaining our exclusion in the workplace. Our glass ceiling is also composed of many other forms of bias, including accent bias, affinity bias, that's huge, and the whole concept of executive presence and culture fit, which presume that to belong, we must fit in with a dominant one way of doing things. For decades, companies have been investing in DEI programs such as unconscious bias training and ERGs and mentoring programs, and yet Asian Americans are still suffering. As you see in this chart, an IBM survey of 1,500 Asian American employees of Fortune 500 companies conducted in 2021 and released last November shows that while 68% of white employees in Fortune 500 companies experience belonging, only 22% of Asian American employees do. I saw this chart and thought back to how much of the first 3 decades of my life were focused simply on my struggle to belong in white dominant environments. I've thought about that so much in the past 2 decades of work, which has been focused for me on the simple task of creating access and inclusion for others. In this time, I've had so many aha moments, both professionally and personally, like this one. In a 2015 Ascend report, researchers asked people whether shyness is very much a problem when you're with people of your own race versus in a mixed race setting. As you see here, they found that while shyness in Asians and whites are similar in a single race setting, 49% versus 47%, in a mixed race setting, the white rate of shyness is virtually unchanged from 47% to 49%, while the Asian rate of shyness jumps to 78%. When I saw this, I realized it turns out it's not just me or my dad who felt so awkward and uncomfortable around white people. 4 out of 5 Asian Americans feel the same way. Tell us in chats, have you ever felt shy around non-Asians? And how did you overcome that?
Joy, we're getting so many amazing comments from people like Maisie Chung saying this is a fascinating aha moment. We have comments from like Dave Chang of Joy drops truth bombs. Wish I knew this when I was younger. But some interesting comments of, like from Christopher Lee saying, we live in a world where people of color have adjusted to white people. It should be the opposite, that we're no longer going to be the majority. Isn't it messed up that Asians need to adjust and assimilate?
I love that. I love that point. And I think that instead of just focusing on culture fit, we need to think about culture add in HR and how we run our companies. Because every one of those, whether Asian, every one of those diverse people are adding to a much broader culture and are providing the experiences and the perspectives that companies need to be successful in a world that's multicultural. So yeah, thank you for all of those. Let's continue, okay?
There was one.
Solutions.
There was one. I know there's some great comments. I know we're not going to get everyone, but Tijil and Sophia Ratsu are saying shyness needs to be reframed. Does it need to be reframed as introversion? And I think there was also a feeling of like, what is, if cold is our Asian stereotype? So like, are we stereotyped as a more cold people because we're quiet and reserved?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we are. And today I want to talk about how we identify, encounter, and overcome those stereotypes. Should we move on? Okay.
Yes, let's move on.
Okay.
Keep the chats coming.
Yes, please do. That's great. Thank you for interrupting, Faye. I mean, thank you for stopping, not interrupting. Thank you for stopping to bring in those chats. I haven't been able to look at them. So growing up, I always thought of my shyness as something that I needed to fix within myself. I now realize that we need to fix environments. We need to create environments and organizations where Asians are not being made to feel isolated, out of place, outnumbered, or resented. As Cornell organizational psychologist Lisa Nietzsche puts it, unconscious biases drive a vicious cycle, leading to a continuous loss of self by outgroup members and a continuous reinforcing of privilege for in-group members. We don't have time today to get into all the specific stereotypes and data around Asian American women who face a double glass ceiling. So I want to focus our short time together on solutions, but suffice it to say that Asian Americans, particularly Asian American women, suffer from something called role incongruence, meaning that the traits associated with us don't overlap with the traits associated with leadership. When an Asian American does show leadership traits, the bar is set higher for us to constantly have to keep proving ourselves in order to dispel any doubts about whether we're fit for a particular role. As a result, organizations are less likely to promote us or to invest in our careers. As you see here, our human capital consists of 2 parts. Personal capital refers to our education, skills, experiences, and knowledge. But you and I know lots of people with high personal capital who work hard their whole lives and yet who ultimately end up not going much of anywhere. That's because personal capital is necessary but not sufficient. To move up in corporate America, you also need network capital, the connections and influence we need to leverage our personal capital to have impact and move up. Network capital consists of 2 parts. The unearned part, meaning the inclusion or exclusion you get based on unconscious biases, and the earned part, meaning the connections and influence you build over your career. Now, standard HR practice is to hire people based on personal capital and then do little to help you develop the network capital you need to succeed and move up. Problem is, when we don't act systematically to create inclusion in our organizations, then in the invisible economy of network capital, the rich tend to get richer while the poor get poorer. And this is the reason for our Asian American glass ceiling. Asian Americans have exceptionally high personal capital and exceptionally low network capital. Our high personal capital allows us to excel in school and in our early careers because life as an independent contributor is a lot like life as a student. Someone assigns you work hard, turn in good work, and get rewarded. No network capital needed. But when it's time to move up, we lack the network capital we need to ascend. What's so confusing about that Harvard and hard work doctrine is that it appears to work so well for so long until suddenly it doesn't. Until suddenly at age 30, because it doesn't train us to believe, it trains us to believe that if we just put our head down and work hard, we'll be rewarded automatically. And that's why starting around age 30, when we should be getting promoted and the promotions don't happen, many Asians start to live with a huge amount of disappointment, frustration, and even shame. So now we see the Harvard hard work doctrine is a real fallacy for our community. It seduces families to invest massive amounts of time, energy, and money into getting kids into Ivy League schools. But more importantly, it distracts us from building the network capital that we need to escape that worker bee life and lead. The irony is that the Harvard hard work doctrine is rooted in a deep sense of insecurity and powerlessness. Our parents just wanted to prepare us as best they could for a world they saw as confusing and sometimes racist. They did the best they could with the information they had. The good news is we now have better information. Okay, so far we've covered a lot of content. Let's recap. We talked about the Asian American glass ceiling and how it stifles nearly every Asian American. Sorry, I have a little bit of allergies. We talked about the cold competence stereotype and how it drives anti-Asian hate on the streets and our exclusion in the workplace. We talked about how our lack of belonging leads to shyness in mixed race environments. And we answered why we suffer from an age 30 problem, because we have exceptionally high network capital, but we can't leverage it due to our exceptionally low network capital. The very good news is we now have a clarity on what and why of the Asian American glass ceiling. We're one step closer to dismantling it. What thoughts do you have? Let's talk about any aha moments that you've had and how they connect to your life and your career. What surprised you thus far? Hey, come on back and let's discuss.
There are so many messages in the chat, amazing people sharing their stories and where they're going. Catherine was saying Asian stereotypes are incongruent with leadership traits. Can't that be more true? Are you finding that leadership traits and the Asian stereotypes just being incongruent from that standpoint?
Yes.
How can we?
I'm gonna.
Okay. And I'll just. Yeah. I'm gonna share a bunch.
I'm gonna just kind of adjust my screen a little bit. Okay.
I'm gonna share a bunch of them, and then you can just you can respond to after I share a group of them.
Absolutely.
So many people going on. Emmy's been wonderful sharing her stories, but she's saying how her mom is a prestige addict. And I've seen that in my parents and communities as well. Palin is saying building network capital requires being more outgoing and more acceptance of rejections, which can be challenging. Lauren Chang said this may be an unpopular opinion, but I think it's also important to point the finger back at ourselves. In many Asian cultures, there's a feeling of the nail that stuck out gets hammered down. And like Joy is saying, academic training success does not translate to professional success. It's just great points. Thuy says, I'm actually not shy. I found that since I don't fit the stereotype, I've been described as aggressive, too assertive, too outspoken, when I don't feel like I'm any different than my counterparts.
You know, that one, let me respond to that one. I have been called aggressive so many times. I think especially I think especially for Asian Americans and especially for Asian American women, we have this phenomenon of from pet to threat, right? Like for me, I found when I've gone into organizations, this was before I was deputy mayor, okay? I think life changed after I was deputy mayor, largely because then people kind of looked at me as a leader and people expect me to be strong. But I would say before that, I had so many times when I would join a new group and kind of be quiet, like anyone would, get a lay of the land, see who's who. And then people would like me. Maybe they would probably say, yeah, typical Asian. But then the second I open my mouth, people be like, whoa, where did all that come from? And call me aggressive. I've been called aggressive so many times when I was behaving just like everyone else. In fact, I was really careful about that. I was looking at who was being successful in those environments, and I was conscious of not being more aggressive than anyone else. But I think that's where these things come from, this sort of pet to threat. There's no just like looking at you as a whole person and who you are. And that's the thing about stereotypes. They're extremely depersonalizing, and they're constantly self-reinforcing.
It was just interesting from that, Catherine was saying, despite the best attempts to be white, there's still a line in the sand that curtails sense of belonging in the workplace.
Yes. Well, I want to talk about that too, because I don't think, I worked really hard to fit in. And, I was probably one of those people that many people here would call a banana. And I guess for me, it took being in China for many years to really go back and discover my own self. I think ideally we'll have environments where people don't feel like we have to abandon our own selves in order to be successful. And I'm hoping that I'm hoping to spend a good part of today talking about how we as corporate leaders, because I've peeked at some of the LinkedIn profiles of people coming. We have some real corporate leaders today. And I really want to focus today on how do we create environments where people who are not part of the dominant in-group feel like they can just be themselves, and that we can make companies that are truly inclusive and where people can culture add and not have to, like in the bad old days, culture fit, in a very narrow one-way stereotype of what a successful person looks like.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And Udayan was saying also in the old economy companies, seems like a haze and that thick fog that you showed.
Yeah.
But he's saying it's not as bad in these new economy companies, the startups, the technology, where we're going and emerging from that. And didn't know if you had any comment to that as well.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think that I think and I hope and I expect that every company where someone who's here today is a member of will over time be more inclusive, because I hope that today I'll share with you some tools. We can all share together some tools that will make all companies in the model of that new that you just talked about.
And then one quick thing is, Pauline, there's so many. I know I'm not getting to everyone's comment. What determines executive presence? Let's assume it's competence, smooth, soft skills. If I'm an Asian woman showing these traits, I might be pegged as aggressive, whereas a white woman would be not described that way. So how do we change this?
There has been a lot of learning and development programs that are there to help you develop, quote, executive presence. There's a very good HBR article on executive presence. I wonder if someone could maybe Google it and find that. And I think it really takes down this whole concept of executive presence as being full of bias. This whole concept of executive presence, it is very fraught. And I hope that we can, it's my preference that we do away with this whole concept of executive presence entirely, because it seems like every time anyone tries to measure it, it kind of goes down a whole bunch of stereotypical rabbit holes. If anyone sees that, please, pop that in. Faye, should we move on?
Yeah, we've been talking about shyness. What makes me wonder is about the imposter syndrome as well.
Hmm.
Does bias also play a role in that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. In fact, I think the very term, just like executive presence, I think the very term imposter syndrome is quite misleading because it almost medicalizes these universal feelings of self-doubt, which are fostered in environments which lack inclusion and trust. We may like to believe that as we mature, our identities stabilize and we become set for life. But scientists tell us that that's not how it works at all. Our self-identities never get fixed over the course of our lives. Human beings are social creatures. We depend on others to recognize us and affirm that we are good and capable. And we're surrounded by people who are constantly and subtly offering their approval and disapproval of us. So, as in group members progress in their careers, their feelings of doubt often lessen as they're repeatedly validated over time. Other people rarely question their leadership style or their right to be in the room. They're made to feel confident and comfortable and oblivious. Neurologists show how this works in our brains. When we receive social affirmation, our brains release serotonin, causing us to feel secure and courageous and self-confident. And as long as we continue to receive approval, our serotonin levels continue to rise, causing our self-confidence to rise. So in the economy of social recognition, the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. When we're admired by others, we get on a virtuous cycle toward greater and greater confidence. But if nobody notices us, or worse, if we're constantly getting signals that we don't belong, our confidence shrivels. Neurologists show us how low status leads to low serotonin levels. We begin to feel unconfident, uncomfortable, alienated, and like a fraud. The term imposter syndrome then focuses us on fixing us who suffer from it instead of fixing the places where we work. Leaders must create a culture where everyone can belong and thrive. And only by doing so can we reduce the experiences that culminate in so-called imposter syndrome. All right, let's move on to solutions. I hate to interrupt, but everyone's comments, please keep them going, but I think we need to move on. We're 10 minutes behind our schedule. In the course of my work, let's move on now to solutions of what we as individuals can do to increase our network capital and overcome these biases. In the course of my work as an executive search consultant, I've interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. Some were midlife career changes. Others were 20-something entrepreneurs who suddenly appeared to change entire industries. The one thing they had in common is that, like me, they got these lucky breaks. If you listen carefully to their stories like I have, over and over again, you'll hear about that one moment they'll point to and say, and that's when it all started. Many struggled for years before that first lucky break, but then it was as if a massive spigot had opened, allowing repeated waves of luck to gush into their lives, just like what's happened to me. So it might seem depressing that our entire careers could hang on the balance of something as random as luck. But as I reflected on my career and others, I realized that in fact, luck is not as random as it looks. There were actions they took to pull those opportunities into their lives. And these actions are the backbone of my China bestseller, How to Get Lucky in Your Career. But after writing that book, I started working in the field of people analytics and found a whole body of network science research, which validates what I wrote, but also lends further depth and clarity to how to build your network most strategically. So in this section, I want to show you those steps. When we think of networking, many of us assume that the bigger the network, the better. In fact, network science shows that's not true at all. You don't need a big network, you need the right network. In fact, there's a whole invisible network of influencers and connectors who can be helpful to you. And analytics gives a way to actually measure and then map those invisible connections. This is an organizational network analysis map, or O&A map. It looks like an X-ray of an organization's communication patterns, and thus it illuminates how an organization actually works. Maps like this reveal when and why people in an organization go to others for information, ideas, career advice, or personal support. We take these millions of bits of data and then use powerful tools, software, to measure and map them onto charts like this one. This is a really powerful capability because how a company actually works is always very different from what you'd expect just by looking at an org chart. And we use this data to learn how to create inclusion for ourselves. Here's a simplified O&A map. In this company, we're looking at the intersection of 3 departments: sales on the left side, R&D on the right side, and marketing on the bottom. Each gray circle is a node or a person, and each line is a tie that shows how they're connected. The map reveals 2 different types of influencers. First are central connectors shown in cream. There's Felix in sales and Lakshmi in R&D. You want to get to know them. Central connectors have many ties within a team, function, geography, or demographic. So they're like the glue that binds together people in a group. They're powerful because they have the trust and respect of many in their group. And so they can quickly get others to accept change and speed execution. And they can block change without company leaders even knowing it. So do you know any central connectors in your department or maybe your ERG or other groups that you're a part of? The other category of influencers shown here are boundary spanners in purple. We have one here, Amy, in the middle. Boundary spanners are especially powerful because they connect different silos in an organization, and they have the ability to drive direction, alignment, and commitment across boundaries in service of a higher vision or goal. They have the ability to block change across silos as well. So you definitely want to try to get to know them. Do you know any in your organization? Network analysis reveals another category of individuals who are unusually disconnected. They're called peripherals and are shown in blue. We have here Jordan, Yan, Kyung, and Tao. I know that we all know a lot of peripherals. How Asian Americans' low network capital harms us is by relegating us to network peripheral status. Companies rush to hire us, but because of our low network capital, many of us remain stuck as peripherals for our entire careers. That's what happened to my dad, and that's what's happening to entire generations of Asian Americans. The phenomenon of the interchangeable Asian is just a symptom of this. They keep confusing us with other Asians. And if they don't know your name, if they don't know who you are, they certainly cannot promote you. So from a network standpoint, our focus should be to transition from the least powerful role, peripheral, to the most powerful, boundary spanner. Become Amy. Why? 2 decades of research into boundary spanners show that their networks are powerful on 3 different dimensions, as you see here on this chart. First, network size. Bigger is not better. Network size shows that the bigger your network, the worse. When too many people seek you out, you get overloaded and burned out and achieve less. When you're a boundary spanner, you don't have the biggest network. You have the right network that puts you in the middle of the action. Second, network reach. Boundary spanners have much broader than networks than anyone else. This is hugely important, not just to gain access to new opportunities, but to gain access to ideas and news from across the organization. This positions you to uniquely create the most creative and comprehensive solutions. You get to be an innovator. And because you're influential across the organization, you're positioned to lead execution. Third, network quality. When you're a boundary spanner, you don't only have what we call lean ties, relationships focused on information and decision-making. Instead, you have rich ties, the types of relationships which provide energy, a sense of purpose, belonging, and trust. As a boundary spanner, you leave people feeling energized instead of drained. All this is why people love working with you and why they seek out opportunities to partner with you. So, network size, reach, and quality is why when you're a boundary spanner, you become a magnet for new opportunities. So how do you become a boundary spanner? Here's how. Okay. Step 1, boundary spanners create broad, energizing connections. Make a list of all those in your company or outside your company who are touched by your work. Don't just focus on people above you. Find people who are lateral to you and also even below you across the organization. And don't just focus on people in your department or race or age group or gender. Make the list as broad and diverse as possible. Keep an eye out for central connectors and boundary spanners. You could ask your boss who you should get to know. Next, reach out and ask a meetup. It could be just a 30-minute Zoom meeting. If someone says no, no problem, move on. When it's time to meet, remember, pull, not push. Now, this may be counterintuitive since people are always telling us we're too modest and we need to learn to toot our own horn. But research shows that boundary spanners create pull, not by pushing. And remember, Asian Americans always are stereotyped as excessively competent and hyper-competitive. So when you meet someone, the first thing you want to establish is that you want to be helpful to them. When you meet someone, they'll usually say, "Tell me about yourself." That's a trap. Don't tell them about yourself. Instead, say, "I'd be glad to tell you about myself. But first, tell me, what are you working on these days? What are you looking to accomplish this year?" Ask questions and deeply understand their needs and objectives. And then try to only dribble out information about yourself to the extent that it can be helpful to them. You can make it a game. Try not to say anything about yourself just to make you look good. Show, don't tell, how good you are by showing how capable you are of helping them. Think of this as your chance to build a real relationship. Identify shared goals and leave people feeling good by making clear that you recognize their status and value, and that you care about what you can do for them just as much as you care about what they can do for you. At the end of your 30 minutes, ask them, "Who else should I get to know?" and follow up with them too. That's step one. Step two, boundary spanners tap their networks for both ideation and implementation. This also may seem counterintuitive. Many of us might like to figure everything out and create the perfect product all tied up with a bow before releasing it out into the world. But that's not what boundary spanners do. At every stage in developing a product, from the very beginning to the very end, boundary spanners seek input from innovators across the organization who can offer fresh new ideas. This always gives all those other innovators a stake in the outcome of the project, so that when it's time to execute on it, all those other influencers are incentivized to help execute, spread, and sell. All this also helps your product be better, more creative, and more tapped into the market. So when you tap your network for both ideation and implementation, the solutions you create will naturally become more creative and comprehensive and better adapted, and execution will be faster and easier and more successful as well. Step three, most people fail to see their own weaknesses or try to bluff our way through. Boundary spanners get clear on their own value add and then work to improve in the areas in which they're weak. Or they find people whose skills and knowledge fill the gaps. Now, I want to point out here, this is about adding value, not identifying your strengths and weaknesses. This is a very different concept. Your strengths and weaknesses have to do with your individual skills and knowledge. How you add value is how you're actually contributing to solving the needs of the world somehow. So we need to get really clear on the unique ways that we add value, and then figure out where we don't add value and identify the people that we need to work together with us to be part of our network so that we can create real value together. Finally, as you build your network and understand everyone's needs, objectives, strengths, and weaknesses, work with them to co-create successes. After all, we're not here to just build our own career and our own story. We're here to co-create wins that benefit everyone. So that's it. Those are my thoughts. I'm really interested in your thoughts and whether this has led to any, jogged any ideas from you. I hope that we all can be here to iterate the best ideas on how to create our networks.
Joy, thank you.
Okay, well, let me just say that. Okay, yeah, let's just start. Last thing I would say is, it's true that, as Asian Americans, most boundary spanners and most of the people I've interviewed are not Asian Americans. So they didn't start out with sort of the deficits that we start out with in network capital, but that makes it all the more important to our careers that we work on filling those gaps in our networks so that we can create the pull that we need to shape serendipity. And finally, I would just say that I suggest you budget 10% of your time to working on building your network. In a 40-hour work week, that would be about half a day's time. So you could set aside one morning or one afternoon a week just doing these things. That could make a big difference in your career. let's see what ideas other people have.
Oh, a lot of ideas, Joy. It was amazing. I think the 3-step process that you kind of outlined with just really tangible things that, we can focus on really building that network. And when you're saying it's not have to be a big network, it has to be the right network from that as well, right? As we kind of look at it as well, we had so many comments. So I have been like busy trying to keep up with everything. And thank you to everyone and for your engagement, but engaging with each other. I loved seeing the support of each other. So anxious to kind of keep in touch and keep the discussion going.
Awesome.
So definitely interesting kind of comments from them. And there were some in the sense of, I'm going to read a couple. Catherine saying, I'm a boundary spanner, but often find opposing forces when trying to exert influence due to unconscious biases that have been discussed.
Yes.
How to empower an Asian boundary spanner like Catherine?
Yeah, that's great. Marco, could you please pull up slide, let's see, my slide that's called The Basis of Trust Shifts with Time. I think this could be helpful to illuminating that. How do we counter unconscious biases? Are you able to do that, Marco?
I'll read a couple other questions so that while you're going through those too.
Great.
Douglas said, when trying to create the right network, do you risk becoming exclusionary? I thought that was a really interesting question as well.
Okay. Yeah. Should I respond to that?
Oh, sure. Or I can read a bunch of questions.
Yeah. Why don't you keep on going, and then
Okay.
so that we can get more in, and then maybe I'll can just wrap it all up together.
Yeah. And then Pearl Kong says, do these principles and concepts discussed reflect situations in the Asian American context, or does it apply to Australia, Europe, and other places as well?
Yeah. Why don't I respond to those two together? These actions that we take to create inclusion for ourselves should never be exclusionary to other people, especially because we're focusing here on creating rich ties. Rich ties are always energizing and empowering to the people that we are connecting with. People should always be left feeling belonged and feeling part of something bigger. So I would say that all of these steps should be, if they're practiced properly, they should be inherently inclusionary. Later on, in the third section, we'll be talking about specifically identifying inclusive behaviors and how company leaders can promote them. But I would say this is absolutely complementary to that. As far as the question about international, I would say these are quite universal. The research that I've been citing about boundary spanners have been set in the United States, but I've worked in China full-time for 10 years, and I would say that these should be broadly applicable. In some other environments, like in China, China is more of a high power, sociologists call it a high power distance environment, where organizations are much more hierarchical, and sort of like bosses make decisions and they come down and decisions get flown down. So in those environments, you actually have less opportunity to collaborate across all different hierarchies. They're much less matrix organizations. So I would say in high power distance environments, networking is actually less important, and because power flows through positional authority instead of through influence. So I would say that these strategies are really adapted to countries, societies of the world that sociologists call low power distance societies, which broadly, very broadly speaking, are more Western societies. I don't know, that was a little too much data, too academic, but I think you all understand that. Okay, so should we, Marco, are you able to pull up that chart or no? Oh, here we go. Thank you. So to the question of how do we counter unconscious bias in our relationships, this chart shows the basis of trust over time. And this shows the 3 stages of any human relationship. On the left side is initiating relationship. When you first initiate a relationship, there's a strong tendency as humans for us to base trust on observable similarities and differences, which drive expectations and actions. This first stage is a stage driven by stereotypes and unconscious biases. So how do we overcome unconscious biases all around us? I think it really comes down to one-on-one relationships, because we have to get past that initial first stage. And that's what this first Zoom call is for. That first Zoom call is not the end of your relationship. As we build our network, we need to continually deepen our relationships to move our relationships along this continuum of trust. Okay, because at the second stage of this relationship, it's called, sorry, my chat is now blocking it, is now called sustaining relationship, right? So during this second stage, as we develop the relationship, the base of trust shifts to how actually somebody behaves. And trust grows as we continue to interact and deepen that relationship and interpret behaviors and reciprocate. The third stage in any relationship is called sustaining relationship. The base of trust shifts to our shared goals and perspectives. At this point, we've moved beyond those unconscious biases. And in fact, we actually overlook behaviors that are inconsistent with our beliefs about someone. So if you look at the bottom of this chart, you see that at first your relationship with someone is depersonalized. And so the question is, how do we move beyond that? We move that by moving along the continuum of relationship. At first, it's based on our category membership. And that's where the interchangeable agent appears, right? But over time, it shifts to a fully personalized relationship based on a specific known individual. And so all this is why, as we develop those boundary-spanning relationships, it's crucial we create those rich emotional ties. Because it's only by developing rich and sustaining relationships, which are one-on-one relationships, that we can overcome those unconscious biases. I'm sorry to say, I think we should really move on.
Oh, I know there's so many questions and comments and thoughts, but I know, yeah, let's move on, because you have some great tips on how to move forward, and then we can try and squeeze in some of these other questions and comments later. Thank you for the community for supporting each other and also responding with what works for you as well.
Yes, okay, thank you. So let's now take off our individual's hat. And I think actually the most exciting part of all this, and put on our hats as corporate leaders, our leaders in corporate America. And from this standpoint, here's the big problem and the huge opportunity ahead of us. So Asian Americans comprise 30% or more of the professional workforce at some companies, particularly those in the financial services and technology industries. But again, once we hire them, many of us, our companies, never actually integrate them into the invisible networks where the work actually happens. For 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, Asian Americans stay on our payrolls. We just don't fully utilize them. Think about that from a workforce standpoint. What a waste of talent and human potential. What if college basketball operated this way? What if Duke, where I went to school, had a huge recruiting team and no Coach K? If they sent their scouts all over the country, bringing in the best, most talented basketball players, and then said, okay, you're a forward, you're a point guard, you're a center, you guys figure it out. And what if over time, a quarter or a third or more of the very best recruits just kind of got lost in the shuffle, overlooked, disrespected, with no playing time? If Duke basketball operated that way, then instead of heading to the Final Four this weekend, they might look a lot like a lot of companies today. Companies today are desperate for workers, and yet the Great Resignation is still happening. Over 40% of all American employees say they plan to quit their jobs in the next 3 to 6 months. And McKinsey found a report last November that the top reason employees cite for quitting is they lack a sense of belonging. Non-white employees are even more likely than white employees to say they quit due to a lack of belonging. And before people check out physically, they check out mentally. So it seems to me that the most important single role of HR should be to unleash the potential of each and every member of our workforce so that they can contribute fully to corporate results and profits. Inclusion is not a nice to have. Inclusion is fundamental to the health and the very existence of the organization. So where are we now in inclusion? By now, over 90% of companies have carefully crafted, thoughtful statements on inclusion and put them on their websites. Many company executives are personally committed to inclusion. The trouble is that inclusion has not yet flowed down through what I call the frozen middle of our companies, the SVPs through the directors. And people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. A lot of bosses say they're inclusive and actually believe they are. In the Lean In McKinsey 2021 Women in the Workplace report released last November, 71% of white employees in Fortune 500 companies say they consider themselves allies to women of color. But as you see here in this chart, when you look into who actually takes allyship actions, the percentage drops precipitously. Two reasons. First, many people simply don't know how to be an ally, and we can educate them on how to mentor and sponsor women of color, how to actively confront discrimination, how to actively advocate for new opportunities for women of color. But the bigger barrier to operationalizing inclusion through the frozen middle is that it takes extra time and energy to champion inclusion. And most companies don't reward or recognize this behavior. Systems create behaviors. And as a result, the work of creating inclusion has become the unpaid housework of corporate life. And guess who's doing this unpaid housework? You guessed it, women. According to that Lean In McKinsey report, women leaders are twice as likely as their male peers to invest time in creating inclusion for others. Women of color are even more likely than white women to be investing significant time and energy into creating inclusion for others. But when the work of inclusion is not rewarded, then doing the work hurts the individuals doing it, and it hurts the companies and all employees, because progress is rarely made on work that's not measured or rewarded. And women have gotten burned out and are still leaving the workforce at record rates. Companies are losing the very inclusion leaders they need most. There is a better way. We must recognize and reward everyone to do inclusion work. But we can only recognize and reward our inclusion champions if we know what they are. The way succession planning happens now in companies is mostly based on intuition. Most leaders can correctly predict who are the top few influencers in their organization. But after naming the most obvious individuals, leaders are often just guessing. As a result, when succession planning, they choose people they know well and like, rather than those who are actually enabling others to succeed. So enter organizational network analysis. Here's that map that we reviewed earlier. And with the addition of two new roles, high potentials are shown with crowns and inclusion champions are shown in red. In our case, company leaders have designated two people as high potentials. Of course, there's our superstar, Amy. But notice that O&A also reveals Austin, who is not actually an influential player at all. In fact, in the hundreds of O&A analyses that my collaborators and I have led, typically about half the people on a company's list of high potentials are only well connected with the people above them, but not actually influential in the rest of the organization. This database approach always reveals another group of people who are hidden stars. They're influential across the organization, but not actually known to the leaders at all. People such as the central connectors, Lakshmi and Felix. And through O&A, we can also uncover another group of people, our inclusion champions, Elena and Sophia. So what can we do as company leaders with this data to operationalize inclusion? Here's a success roadmap for organizations. First, we must recognize and reward our inclusion champions. This is non-negotiable. These are the people in our organization who are actually doing the work of enabling their colleagues to fully contribute their talents. And they represent major flight risks. If an inclusion champion leaves, not only will we suffer, but they could go off to a competitor and unleash the potential of employees there. So we should reward them and celebrate them and groom them as future company leaders. We can give them access to special mentoring and training and give them access to fast track opportunities so that it's clear to everyone that being an inclusion champion is a stepping stone to bigger and better things. Second, We should give our peripherals the support they need to integrate into company networks, to enable them to contribute fully to company operations. We can connect them with influencers who we empower and incentivize to help their colleagues to integrate. For companies combining remote work with return to office, we can coordinate in-person days for peripherals in office with those they need to meet and help them focus their valuable in-person time together on emotionally rich experiences such as mentoring and creating shared purpose. That leads to number 3. We can identify the specific concrete behaviors that create inclusion in our company, because that's different from company to company based on company culture. And then we can tailor learning and development to very specifically show everyone how to become an inclusion champion. And we can incentivize everyone to enact those behaviors, and we can hold everyone accountable. Everyone can play a role in creating inclusion for themselves and others. And as with any change, for quickest uptake and to avoid getting blocked in the frozen middle, we can first recruit our boundary spanners and central connectors and incentivize them to flow our inclusion program through company networks. So that's all I have today. Now that you know what the Asian American glass ceiling is, I hope that you'll educate others. Let other people know how the model minority myth masks the reality of exclusion, and the violence against us on the street is just the flip side of our exclusion in the workplace. We're 12% of the workforce, but only 1.5% of Fortune 500 corporate officers. Because companies rush to hire us in, but rarely actually integrate us into the invisible networks where the work actually happens. Today, you saw the latest research on organizational networks and how to operationalize inclusion and unlock human potential. You learned how, as individuals, we can become powerful boundary spanners and thus generate pull for new people and fresh opportunities. And you learned how, as company leaders, we can stop wasting all that talent and unleash the potential of all in our organizations. As I do this work, sometimes my mind wanders to my dad, born in China, a refugee to Taiwan, who then was recruited all the way to MIT to get a master's in engineering. I wonder how far he could have soared if only his employer had included him. If he had been allowed to fully contribute his talents, how far could he have gone? It's too late now for Dad. He died in the pandemic. But every time I remember him, I'm resolved to double down on helping companies measure, map, and operationalize inclusion. If you've ever felt like an outsider, like I have, just think of how awesome is this power we all now have to create inclusion for ourselves and for all those around us. Because with our every word and deed, we're all creating culture now. And I can't think of work that's more important than leading our companies to include all people and thus unleash their confidence, their potential, and their ability to make impact in the world. Now's the time to get started. What will your first steps be? Let us know in the chats. And when we started planning this today, we thought maybe 50 people would show up or 100, but here we are. I don't know how many people showed up, but a few hundred people.
Yeah. We had 330 at one of the counts from that. So it's been an amazing, amazing group and audience, and getting a lot of kudos, incredible session, amazing from that. There's been also feeling for your loss of your dad,
thank you.
loss in COVID. So people wanted to give their sentiment. One question that kind of recurring, and people really wanted to just, I know we're running out of time, but wanted to squeeze this one in, is what can we do our best to really address warmth? Can it be taught? Can we change people's perceptions of Asians from being cold to warm? What can we do in that area? That a lot of people have that question.
Okay, great. You know, a lot of companies have instituted unconscious bias training, like these once a year things. To me, I thought about this a lot, and I think that the most powerful and maybe the most effective and the only way that we can do it is through one-on-one relationships. The way that we, the once a year unconscious bias training, I think it's important to do it, but it's not enough. The way that we counter bias is to constantly, the research shows, is to constantly present disconfirming evidence. And the best way to do that, disconfirming evidence of the stereotypes. And the best way to do that is through constant repeated exposure to people, so that they see your behaviors, they see the full you. And I think the way to do it is through one-on-one relationships.
Yes.
Because the thing is, if it's just in large groups, oftentimes people won't go, people won't go to these sessions. The people who are already biased, they don't willingly go to these things. Often they're busy with other priorities. So we end up preaching the converted. So I think the way is to reach out and to show your warmth through one-on-one relationships.
Thank you, Joy.
Faye, do we want to talk about ERGs or?
Yeah, no, I thought, when you were talking about the ERGs and the data and the network analysis, kind of to my sense, right? Your ERG is in a sense your own network, right? Like kind of influencing that change and where you're going. But what we see is a lot of companies do employee surveys, right? Like, and how do those compare? And kind of as you're talking about the data, I'm just kind of curious from that standpoint as well.
Okay, I think I heard two questions in there. One is ERGs and one is employee engagement surveys and how they all fit in. Like, how do we use these tools? So let me address ERGs first. Marco, could you pull up that last slide on what companies can do? So here's the problem with ERGs as I see it. Companies trumpet ERGs on their websites, but most ERGs are massively underfunded, and ERG leaders just don't get recognized or rewarded for their work. So ERG work has become unpaid housework. And it's a massive amount of unpaid housework to plan all those events and programs. I'm working with a few ERGs right now to plan some company keynotes for Asia Pacific American Heritage Month in May. So I'm seeing these people up close. And what I'm seeing is that ERG leaders are the inclusion champions. They are the central connectors that we need the most. They are the ones who are driving inclusion. They're so talented, so committed, but they're burning out and they're turning over. So how can companies address ERGs? Number one, let's just go through these steps. Number one, do not let them burn out and leave. They are most important, among our most important inclusion champions. Give them access to special mentoring and training and fast track opportunities. In fact, I think it'd be great to connect them with top company executives for reciprocal mentoring. They can educate executives on the concerns of the diverse employees in the company, and executives can mentor them. Number two, ERGs can play a huge role in facilitating the support and network integration of their ERG members. And number three, ERG leaders are central connectors. They should get special attention and be enabled and incentivized to flow inclusion programs through their networks. Let me quickly address your other question about these data tools, and then I want to hear more of people's thoughts. And then I'd be happy to stay for another few minutes, 15 minutes, afterwards if people want to continue to engage. On the question of these tools and employee engagement surveys. So first of all, here's my global thought on people analytics. If we're ever going to move inclusion out of the realm of these fuzzy mission statements and into reality, we need to treat inclusion like any other corporate imperative, with goals, budgets, measurable outcomes based on data. So employee engagement surveys and pulse surveys are a great way to gain subjective data on people's experiences in our companies. They provide insights about individuals' feelings, whether they are experiencing a sense of belonging, but they don't reveal the presence or absence of the relationships that actually comprise inclusion. They don't reveal the presence or absence of the relationships that actually lead people to experience sense of belonging. So sometimes company leaders have a hard time, they get all this data, but they have a hard time figuring out how to act on that data. And here's this broader, I think, question in HR and people analytics, that we now have such powerful technology and tools which generate a ton of data and insights. But the way I see it, insights without action is just overhead. I mean, it's cool to keep learning about our workforce, but learning is not enough. I think we need to, people analytics needs to be sort of underneath our overall business outcomes. We need to identify first the business outcomes that we plan to achieve, say inclusion, and then choose and use the analytical tools to help us develop the targeted actions that we need to achieve those goals. So what's special and interesting about ONA is it's the only tool out there in the world of people analytics, which allows us to actually measure inclusion, to pinpoint who's championing inclusion, who's creating it, who's not being included, and what specific behaviors actually result in inclusion in a given company. And pinpoint who are the influencers that we need to bring aboard our change management program to flow change through the company. So O&A is not well known, it's true, but it's actually a well-established corner of people analytics. It's been around for decades. My collaborators on O&A, Rob Cross and Peter Gray, between them have published over 20 articles on O&A and HBR, Harvard Business Review, and MIT Sloan Management Review, and other similar publications. But what's different now and novel is that based on my own 2 decades of work on unleashing human potential, deputy mayor and workforce development, we're now using O&A to actually, we're using O&A to support inclusion. So I hope that sort of addresses, and I think that employee engagement surveys and O&A can work together, provide even a richer data set on belonging, and you have these experiences, and then you have like, how do we create actions that that can improve experiences, and actually we can measure how we're doing using continued employee engagement surveys and pulse surveys.
And Joy, there's a lot of questions on how could they learn more about O&A, links to O&A surveys from Jacqueline and Betsy. And so there was some interest in that as well.
You can look up my collaborators on O&A. I will be writing a lot more about this. I've just been, I'll start writing about how to use O&A, because it is quite novel to use O&A to support inclusion. So I will be writing, look for more from me, you can follow me on LinkedIn, you can subscribe to my blog in April. If you want to look at O&A in general, you can search for Rob Cross and Peter Gray in Harvard Business Review. I'm at Team Management Review. There's a lot of stuff out there. It's really cool stuff.
Just a lot of great comments and questions and things from that as well. I loved Warren's really engaging. He's calling in from his newly formed ERG right now. So it's been.
I love ERGs. I love ERGs, but I just feel like they're totally not being properly utilized by companies, and they cannot be. ERGs cannot be unpaid housework. If we're going to trumpet them on the website, if we say that they're essential to our DEI agenda, then I think we need to really figure out what they are there for and how we can maximize them. And we need to recognize, as I said, the ERG leaders, they are the ones who are creating inclusion. They need to be treated that way.
Daphne was saying, how do we raise belonging in diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations?
Yeah, belonging. So I think there's, some people use all these words interchangeably. So you have like diversity. Diversity relates to like raw numbers of people, like at different levels in an organization. Then you have inclusion, and everyone calls it, sometimes it's like DEIB, sometimes. Here's the way that I would look at it. Equity has to do with, how, when we give inputs of our work, are we getting proper outputs, right? And we can look at equity, we can just measure like how many people are being brought in of different groups, and how things look as they progress in an organization. I think of inclusion as kind of composed of 2 totally different experiences. First, you have full belonging, and then you have full being yourself. Okay, so that this is like 2 different experiences, and they both have to be optimized. So what that means is, like, if I experience inclusion, I experience like I fully belong in this organization. Equity is part of that. I feel like I can move up just like everybody else. That to me is essential to full belonging. I am just as important a member in this organization as anyone else. Then on the other side would be belonging, which is, that's belonging. The other side would be, I can be fully myself. Like, I don't have to become a banana in order to fully belong. I can be myself and I can fully belong. So I guess to me, that's how I look at belonging as ideal inclusion, as these 2 different experiences both experienced. Some people bring out belonging as a totally separate thing because they define inclusion a different way.
Great. Wonderful from that standpoint. I think some people were commenting too, like on the underfunding and they're not getting as much recognition, to your point, that they need and kind of support in their companies too. I was noticing some
Yeah,
of
you
that.
know, I think that there are companies that treat DEI as a more performative thing. On the other hand, I do think that there are company leaders. I know there are company leaders out there who are really serious about inclusion, and they just don't know how to go about doing it, or maybe they know and they're just sort of early in their journey. I feel optimistic. I do think that I think that in 200 years, Asian Americans have the opportunity now more than at any other time in our nation's history. We have enough critical mass. I mean, look at the people who are here today. There are some real company leaders today. We have a critical mass here that we can effect change, not just for ourselves, but on a broader level. I would love to know how we can all work together. And maybe it's through the Ascend Executive Network. I mean, I don't know there's any other group that's bringing us all together. And Faye, you're a major driving force behind the AEN. Maybe we can think about that. People have ideas, please write in. I would love to continue this conversation with you all. As I said, I'm going to be doing some writing, but it's not a one-to-many thing. To me, I want to really collaborate. And maybe AEN is the forum that we do that. We should think about that.
And then we also have our, I think with a lot of different forums, we have a lot of representatives from all different organizations, but I'm also thinking our Ascend National Convention in August is going to be in Anaheim, and we get thousands of people together across multiple industries and companies and really kind of connect. So I would love to see people in person. I love Zoom and the Brady Bunch boxes, but I would love to see you guys, as we were talking, that network building, the one-on-one, the relationship.
Let's get together. I haven't made my plans, but I'll come to Ascend, to the National Convention. I'm right here in LA. Great. Everyone, let's all go. Let's all go. I would love to see everyone. It would be great.
That would be wonderful.
In person. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Joy, I did put your LinkedIn and also your website, so if you can follow, because there was definitely a lot of interest in ONA and where we're going right that. I'll put also just our kind of Ascend link, is kind of we definitely have upcoming events, great speakers such as Joy from that, but to continue, more importantly, to continue the conversation, how we can all excel individually, but also together as a group and as an alliance across all of us. So really excited about that. Registration is not up yet for the Ascend convention, but it will be shortly. So you can, I put the kind of links to Ascend Network as well. Amazing to have advocates like Brian and company here as well. And thank you, Marco, for putting this up. These are all ways you can kind of stay connected with Ascend. We have YouTube, Twitter, you can email us, Facebook, Instagram, any of our, and also our website too. So definitely really appreciate all of you here. Love the conversation, the energy, the efforts, the chat, and the continued discussion. And think of it, you've now expanded your network, several hundreds of people, because I definitely saw all the LinkedIn moving. So really broadening your networks as well. So really appreciate it, everyone. So great. I think I know some people have to run. We are past the top of the hour. Joy and I can stay for about 5 more minutes from that standpoint, because I know we didn't get to everyone's comments. I was fast and furious trying to keep up with all of you while facilitating from that standpoint. And it was just such an engaging audience. I know many of you wanted to keep connected with each other. So please go ahead. You can copy down the chat from that as well. Joy, I know there was kind of discussion about slides and access. I know we'll need to talk about that offline and where we can go from that as well, but definitely keep connected with each other. I see people are posting their LinkedIn's right now. We're going to keep the lines open so that you can kind of copy everything down, get connected with each other, click those links. Thank you so much for everyone. Your insights, your feedback, sharing, engagement has been amazing. Fast and furious from
Thank
that
you
standpoint.
all.
So thank you.
Yeah.
So any key questions? If we have Joy for just a few more minutes left, any other key questions that you would like to see add from that?
Yeah, while they're putting in any final thoughts, maybe I'll just say sort of a closing thought. I know that after 2 years of all this anti-Asian hate, it's actually just 2 years and 200 years of repeated surges of violence and hate against Asian Americans. I know that many of us are tired and grieving and scared for ourselves, for our parents, for our loved ones. But I hope that we don't compound all this tragedy by failing to act. As Asian Americans, we've always been invisible minorities and the perpetual foreigner. But for many of us, this hate has served as a wake-up call for us as well as for our allies. And I do believe that right now, at the start of April 2022, we have the best opportunity we've ever had to turn the tide of our exclusion and to help our companies lead the way to create greater inclusion for ourselves, for our community, and for all people.
Yeah.
So I hope that we have a bias toward action. Today is not about learning. Today is learning towards action. Let's get out there and do it.
Love that. And Melanie was writing, love the proactive solutions. Would love to chat about what do we do when we witness bias happening in our workplace? And then we have also from Lauren, do you have any tips to overcome imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
Is it fake it till you make it?
When we see discrimination or biased acts happening, I think the best thing to do, if possible, is to interrupt the bias as it's happening. So let's say if it's like one-on-one, if someone's saying something to us, I think of, has anyone been watching that TV show, the American Coach, and what's that guy called? The guy, American Coach, Ted Lasso. So he's an American soccer coach, and his mantra, I think, is so great. It says, be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's, so like when we see bias, instead of saying, that's racist, maybe say, oh, well, what did you mean by that? And just try to challenge and sort of be curious and identify what's behind that. Sometimes if you simply say, oh, what did you mean by that? People say, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend or something. So if that's someone like directing something to you, if you're in a meeting and you see somebody acting in a biased way towards somebody else, I think that you just have to take every situation as it is. If it's a known bully and everybody knows and everyone's just like, oh, give me a break, it might not even be worth it because everyone already knows and it's not challenging. Ideally, we do it in a way that we're not embarrassing other people and alienating them and making them enemies. But maybe it's something that, later on you bring that person aside and say, hey, I was a little bit, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about that. I think that some other people, you can even position it as like, I know you didn't mean to offend, but I looked around and I saw that I felt that, the message that some people got was not what you intended to give. I think this all depends a lot on relationships. If you don't have a relationship with that person and that person is just going around and you don't think that person is being very impactful in their discriminatory acts, it might not even be worth it. I think that it's always good to go to the target, either on the spot or afterwards, and talk to them and just say, I saw what happened. That's not okay with me. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that happened. Are you okay? And just deal with them. So I think you could sort of try to address it with the person who's the aggressor as well as the person who's the target. The second question was on imposter syndrome. I think the first thing on imposter syndrome is to recognize that, first of all, everyone has points of self-doubt. And so I think, as with any sort of mindfulness, the first thing is just to recognize that this is something, it's a thought that we're having that is outside of us. It is not a reflection on who we are or innate worth or capability as a person. We're having a thought, right? So first I would say just practice mindfulness. And then secondly, look around and say, you know, I mean, you are at the company because they believe that you belong. So, and to just have awareness that imposter syndrome is really, as I see it, a reflection of exclusion and bias in the workplace. Anything that's beyond self-doubt, you know, if some people experience self-doubt more than other people, then there's two reasons for that, right? Either these people are just less capable, which we know is not true, or there's something wrong with the environment. That's the way I look at it. So I think awareness about how to look at imposter syndrome is really important.
Great. So wonderful resources. Tammy Ho, who's actually a kind of professor and kind of studying, she's on the Stop Asian Hate, also has a lot of resources on Act Now. Tammy, we have to get you to speak at a future session too, and all your deep dives there. Brian Peng, and you know, he is an ERG leader.
Brian is such a hero to me and to so many. He just does so much, just like you, Faye. I mean, I feel like I just came back from China a couple of years ago, and I'm like stunned at this incredible leadership in our community, and anything I can do to support you all, and anything I can do to support ERG leaders, especially, reach out. I'm glad to serve as a sounding board. I've been in the trenches in corporate America a long time, and if I can help to mentor you and think about how to really create inclusion and to uplift people in your ERG, and also to position your ERG in the most strategic way. You can just find me through my website is getjoyous.net. It's pretty easy to remember.
We are out of our time. I wanted to give the past moments. Marco, too, if you can make sure that the chat is saved as well, as that would be wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for all your participation, your engagement, the wonderful kind of chats that were just ongoing. Enjoy. Thank you so much for your time here. Marco, it's been amazing behind the scenes, getting us to this place. Marco, thank you so much for all your support here. Gloria, Winston, Robert, there's so many people to kind of help make this. But thank you all for attending. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. It's great to be with you. Hope to see you next time. See you in Anaheim.
Take care.